1,000 years ago and more. From out of nowhere, on the sea winds, longboats, raiders, Vikings. Across the northern sea they came, seeking silver and gold, treasure.
Those are the stories and the narratives that have been told over the years.
Great reputations were made, great kingdoms founded. All built, so we're told, on the riches that they stole.
But in reality, that's not quite the truth.
From old ideas to new discoveries, new knowledge, challenging what we thought we knew about Norway's fiercest exports.
And of course, nobody switched on that button and said, oh, we're Vikings, let's go raiding.
Vikings before Vikings. This is the true story. History tells us that the Viking Age began at the end of the 8th century. That Scandinavian longboats suddenly appeared on the shores of Britain, Ireland and Europe.
We have this idea that the Viking Age begins with a bang in 793 with the attack on Lindisfarne.
At Lindisfarne and elsewhere, they sacked churches and monasteries. They murdered, raped and took away captives. But most of all, they stole. Food, cattle, anything they could carry. And what they wanted most was treasure. Silver. This, history tells us, is how the Vikings became prosperous. For almost 300 years, until the mid-11th century, their success, power, and above all their great wealth came from raiding. But was this really the case?
We are understanding that the picture is a lot more complex than what we used to think.
What if the people, known to us now as Vikings, didn't just appear like that off the coast of Britain in 793? And what if they didn't get rich just through what they stole when they began taking to the seas? What if they were already prosperous and wealthy? What if before they were raiders and invaders, they were traders?
We hear so much about the raids and the violence and the kings, but actually it's more the everyday people. That's really where you can find the true story about the Vikings.
To investigate, we'll follow a team of experts from Norway and the UK. They're archaeologists, specialists and researchers, highly experienced in unearthing and studying the remains of the Viking Age. In this unique two-part special, with exclusive access for our cameras, we'll go with them as they uncover new knowledge about this amazing period in Scandinavia and Europe's past. We'll share in the journeys as they search down clues in the landscape, the secrets that abound in the earth. And we'll be there as they try to piece together new ideas, new interpretations of the Viking past. Experts believe the Vikings, who according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle first attacked Britain, were probably from Norway. Today when we think of Vikings, it's hard not to think of this same country. Echoes of its Viking heritage are still very evident in modern Norwegian society. Some are still national symbols of identity there, although the emphasis these days is rather less on their penchant for plundering.
Yeah, so growing up in Norway, we do learn about the Vikings, and these are sort of our big pride, really. This is the part of, a glorious part of our history where we went out and we discovered and we explored. You get less of the violent side as a child in school.
Archaeologist Kat Jarman is Norwegian, and she's lived and worked in Britain for many years, so she's well placed to see how both cultures are brought up on the Vikings from an early age.
The Viking Age is really when Norway really begins as a country, so the modern country that we then go on to learn about at school. So it is a really interesting point to see that key moment, that key period that essentially creates the Norway that you grow up in the 21st century.
The Vikings brought about great change for many countries and cultures, with wide-ranging effects beyond their own age. Yet when they're supposed to have suddenly appeared at the end of the 8th century, Norway wasn't even one nation.
There is something called Norway, but it's not a country in that sense at all. So we have these smaller regions, we have probably chiefdoms, we have these sort of smaller units that are being ruled by somebody. We haven't got written records of it, so we actually don't know.
This is one of the key things about our knowledge of the Vikings today. They didn't write their own chronicles and histories. And if they did, they're lost to us now. So archaeology is vitally important in leading the truth. And that archaeology shows how powerful the people from this region became. Norway is a big country, with thousands of square miles that are just too mountainous or remote for much human habitation, especially in the long winter time. That's as true today as it was in Viking times. The team we'll follow are unlocking the secrets of the Vestfold and Telemark region. It's home to some of the most famous archaeological treasures of the Viking Age, not just in Norway, but the whole Viking world.
One of the most unique parts really of Viking Age Norway is the South Norwegian areas, places like Vestfold, where we have these incredibly rich sites.
The famous burial ships Gokstad and Oseberg were discovered in the late 1800s and early 1900s. They're Norway's most famous Viking treasures.
I mean, these are spectacular, not just on a Norwegian scale, but on a world scale. These are World Heritage treasures, really.
The great burial ships are the best known, but there are many more ancient sites and places in the region, especially along the Vestfold coast. 1300 years ago, it seems to have been a heartland of forces that were driving Viking expansion.
There's something really unique there at the time. It was a hugely important place, also on a world scale, I would say. So it's not just a sort of popular modern interest, but actually going back into the time itself, there was something very crucial happening at that place and at that point in time.
Why was the area so important? Mølen, on the southern extent of Vestfold and Telemark's coast, these great mounds aren't natural. They're made from huge shingle boulders. They're so strong that they've resisted weather erosion since at least the Viking Age. And probably, so archaeologists like Ragnar Orton Lee believe, since way back in the Iron Age.
All these are designed to be visible on the shoreline for all those who sail by. The mounds are placed just on where you can get the best profile from the sea looking inland.
Even after standing for a millennium, they were so big that they were still on sea charts in the 19th century and used as landmarks for ships, maybe to warn them as they came close to the shore. On a day like this, it's easy to see why. They're meant to be seen. They're displaying something. This is the entrance to the Oslo Fjord, to the Vestfold and Telemark coast. To get there from the open sea, you came past these mounds. You were meant to see them here. You were approaching an important region, and you had to mind what you were about. Mølen's impressive, but it's nothing compared to what lies further up the fjord. With a good wind, it's just an hour or so north along the coast. And there, from your ship, you'd see the burial place of kings, Bora, 12 kilometers north of present-day Tonsberg. The old name was Bora Hoven. It means the Bora Mounds. There are 7 large and more than 20 smaller burial mounds. Some are over 45 meters in diameter and up to 6 meters high. The largest has an estimated volume of 4,500 cubic meters. They're all together in 45 acres, over 180,000 square meters. There's no other concentration of burial mounds like this anywhere else in Scandinavia. It's been likened to a Viking Valley of the Kings, only the kings, queens, chiefs are all nameless. But certainly, the people buried here were important.
Bora has been known as a really important place in Scandinavian Viking Age, and it's easy to understand why. You take a look at these huge mounds. It used to be 9, there are 7 left. There are a lot of other structures here that continue to impress us.
There are fewer mounds now because in early 1852, workers building a road used one of them, unbelievably to us now, as a gravel pit. When the mound collapsed, someone realised what it was, and archaeologist Nikolai Nikolaisen was called in. But what he was about to find was a world first.
So it was all trashed up, and he found what was left of a Viking ship. He could follow the rivets from the boat for over 12 meters, but it was a complete mess. But this is the first time in world history that an archaeologist is documenting a Viking ship. So he saved what was left of the very rich burial and was able to establish that this is a very significant early find from Viking Age.
From this very first investigation, one thing was clear. The people buried here were wealthy, beyond the wildest dreams of most ordinary people back in Viking times. There was everything you'd expect royal Vikings would need on their journey to the next place. Perhaps Valhalla. Armour, weapons, horses, saddlery, hunting dogs, and treasure. Always treasure. Silver and also gold. The intricate designs on jewellery were so unique that they were classified as a new category in Viking Age art, Bora style. A national park was created around the whole site, and for more than a century, no further digging was allowed. So how did archaeologists find out how old the burials were? Terje Gansson has devoted much of his career to investigating Bora. He's the leader of Vestfold and Telemark's Fylkeskommun archaeology team, the Kulturarv, and he's spent decades broadening our understanding of Bora. He's researched all the archaeology previously done here. It was Terje's university mentor, Bjørn Myhre, who came up with an idea of how to try and date some of the mounds without serious invasive new excavation. They needed organic material from deep inside the mounds, from which to get a C14 carbon date. How was he going to do this? Well, many of the mounds had been dug into a long time ago, and Bjørn Myhre saw an opportunity.
As you can see, every mound here has been reopened again, probably sometime after it was sealed for the first time. You can obviously see the volume, and we can anticipate that part of the center of the mound is deliberately put outside here. So if you took charcoal from these contexts, you might be dating something that has been in the center of the mound. So that was the thought of Bjørn Myhre, that it must have come from the center of the mound. Let's date what we can find easily instead of doing a lot of excavations.
The plan worked. And what's more, the organic build-up over the spoil heaps meant that they themselves could be dated with striking results.
And it's possible to date. So the reopening of the mound here, we can date it to the end of Viking Age.
The Viking Age is only supposed to have begun in 793 AD. The material from inside showed that the mounds were already centuries old by then. The monumental power culture here was already long established.
This shows us that this way of expressing themselves with monuments starts much earlier than what we tend to call the Viking Age. But there's no reason that we can't call this 7th, 6th century mound a Viking Age mound. They did the same kind of rituals, this is the same culture.
Before the Viking Age, the same Viking culture. It's tantalizing. The implications for Viking history are huge, yet this is almost all the hard archaeology that's been done on the burials. Even top experts like Terje can't excavate here without real justification, so he and the Kulturarv team have to find other ways.
People actually tend to believe that archaeologists have worked and dug out a lot of these. But the fact is that we have very, very few archaeological trenches within the park, because this is a very, very strict protected area. And that's why we have invested so much in non-invasive methods to use on this site, because then we don't need permission, then we can detect a lot of what's hidden underneath the ground without doing archaeology. We tend to discover new things each year.
Terje has backed a big move into non-invasive sensing, like geophysics and georadar. Some of the work they've done is the most extensive in archaeology anywhere in Scandinavia. And every now and then, Bora gives up another of its secrets. Petra Schneidhofer and Krista Tonning are two of the geophysics team. They've surveyed thousands of square meters of the region's Viking Age places, much of it at Bora. Today they're surveying one of the newest found graves. Its mound disappeared over time, and the grave itself might have been unknown forever, until in only 2019, by chance, it was found. It's special because it's a boat grave, not as big as the one excavated in 1852, but still rare nonetheless. It's also personal to Krista because it was his own daughter who discovered it.
My daughter, who was in school back then, she needed to learn how to be in a workplace. And she came along with me. So we did the entire 50 by 50 meter area here. And when I came home processing the data, I literally fell off my chair because there was a ship in the data. And they don't come often. So that was a good day.
How old was she at the time?
She was 14.
Made a first boat grave find at 14.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere.
Even though they surveyed it before, it's very useful to come again at different times, in different conditions, as these can mean different results. The more they can combine, then over time, the clearer the picture they'll have for future research. As the georadar data accumulates, the ghostly outline of a 1,000-year-old grave ship takes form. From the team's research, it's clear that Bora was an important place in this part of Norway during pre-Viking times, the centre of a kind of small state, like the city-states of the classical world, a kind of Vikingopolis. It took someone, a family, dynasties, whoever they were, power to create and then sustain it over centuries. Power, but above all wealth. And this is before they went over the sea in longboats simply to steal it. So where did they get it? The Kulturarv team have been trying to find out. Ragnar Orton Lee wonders how Bora fitted in with what was going on in Vestfold at the very beginning of the Viking Age and before. Along the coast, there are several known Viking places. They're not big enough to be towns, but through archaeological finds, we know some of the activity that took place there. Trade. Small scale weights and even scales themselves have been found. Bits of silver that were lost. Plus the remains of small, regularly spaced plots of land, almost like allotments. In these were workshops and traces of goods that were actually made there. These were trader settlements. One of them, Kalpang, has been known about for some time, and its name even means marketplace. But now Ragnar is looking at other, less well-known sites, and he's beginning to see a pattern. The Gokstad mound is known for its famous burial ship. The mound and the ship are called Gokstad, or Gokstad Heimdal, because of the place. There seem to have been two names for the small settlement here. It's hardly known about compared to Kalpang, but Ragnar knows where to look. A farmer's field at the back of the sprawling modern town.
In 1995, there was a new intersection on the road in the back of us. The archaeologists started to find a lot of production waste and structures for buildings. So we started figuring out that between 400 and 500 meters away from the Gokstad Mound, there is a Viking Age site of production and transaction.
There's been no hard archaeology done here. The scant facts that Ragnar knows are from an exploratory geophysics survey the team did a few years ago. They had a hunch that maybe there was something here, and they were right.
At the surveying in 1995, we could see about 10 centimeters left of a cultural layer, riddled with slags, tools, glass beads, stuff like that. We could see post holes from houses. We could see part of the ditches.
The geophysics were really promising. It looked very much like the team had discovered a new trader settlement. But then fate and farming intervened.
The excavation starts in 2012. Unfortunately, there's been plowing of this field once, and 10 centimeters of cultural layers, most of the post holes vanished. So just the remains of the parcel ditches were left.
The crop and harvest wiped out the only known physical remains of Gokstad Heimdall's Viking Age trade settlement. But at least Ragnar knew he and the team were onto something. They began putting it all together, looking for places where there was archaeological evidence of production or manufacturing, anything to do with trade. With each year that goes by, more and more finds add to the picture, as well as Kalpang, Gokstad Heimdall, Hedrum, Hornfoss. Was this some kind of trade network? And was it controlled by Bora? They had to be getting something to trade with, something to sell. But what? The clues lay in the archaeology. Ragnar and the others looked at the fragments left behind. There was evidence of iron production, the smelting of iron ore, for their own use and also to sell on. There were materials like soapstone for carving bowls and other domestic items, combs, often finely made and decorated, from bone or reindeer antler. There was a whole range of commodities, from everyday items to luxurious status symbols. There were things here that you could sell anywhere, to all levels of society. And all the raw materials needed to make all of these trade goods were right there in this part of Norway. The Kulturarv team surveys all the archaeological sites within the region. And Norway, still now but especially back in Viking times, is rich in natural resources. Vestfold and Telemark are currently 2 counties combined together. From the Vestfold coast right up to the Telemark uplands in the north. The largest national park in Norway, Hardangervidda, is an upland plateau that covers more than 3,500 kilometres. Just mountains, lakes and rivers. At Skinnebu, there's still one of the largest wild reindeer herds in the world. The animals have been hunted here since prehistoric times, as well as food for their pelts and their antlers. These were important resources in Viking times, and the hunting of reindeer and other animals reached a huge scale. Precious gyr falcons and other birds of prey were also hunted here, captured alive for export to rich nobles to use in falconry. They would even be exported overseas, so sought after they were. There are also archaeological sites that reveal another kind of activity here, and one that was on a surprising scale. They're easily missed. You could walk past and never know they were there.
Ah! So this is where the road just narrowly got into part of the coal pit, just the outskirts of it. And then you can see all the remains of the coal production is just in here. Of course, all the large pieces of charcoal is used in the iron production.
Coal pits aren't something you think of as from the Viking Age. Yet iron production was hugely important for trade, and so the availability of coal made this region ideal.
So you can just see the earth surrounding it as a bank, and the actual pit for coal production is what I'm standing in now. They would fill this with timber, cover it with earth and turf, and then just burn the coal.
An industrial landscape involving coal pits and iron ore smelting, smoke and flame and deforestation. It's more like our impression of 18th century Britain than idyllic, untouched Norway.
So about 1200 years before the Industrial Revolution, there's a massive production here.
The problem for Ragnar and the team is that these sites are scattered over such a vast area. To keep abreast of trying to assess them all, they needed a game changer. And thanks to the Norwegian government, they got one. Laser imaging, detection and radar. LiDAR, or LIDAR if you prefer.
LIDAR is kind of a scanning of a landscape that removes all the vegetation. So like a burial mound or a coal pit or anything that either elevates from the ground or is dug down in the ground will give a clear feature.
The Norwegian Mapping Authority has embarked on a LiDAR survey of the whole of Norway. The Kulturarv team combined this data with aerial photos, including reconnaissance from the Second World War. All put together, it's a powerful real-time lens through which to examine the past and the scars it sometimes leaves in the landscape.
We have this national database of cultural heritage sites. And of course, with driving distances and stuff, it helps us a lot. What's the potential in this area? Should I go in the car and drive 3 hours to see? Or should I just take a look on my computer and say, there is something here. We actually do need to look at this area. Let's just go into one of the areas where there's nothing yet on the in the database. So you can see these red dots here are heritage sites. It lies at about 880 meters above sea level. And once I want to take a look at it, I can go to just aerial photo and I can see that it's covered with some forest. It's peaty, so it will give good iron ore. You have a river close by, so it's suitable for iron production.
The LiDAR gives Ragnar what the maps and photos alone can't, the extra dimension.
Then I can switch on the LiDAR data. That gives you a lunar landscape. The screen is now cut away all the vegetation, so the birch forest is gone. And then of course all these craters are coal pits. So these are for producing coal for an iron production site. We can look at them in different shades, kind of, and we see there's about 11 of them in this area alone. There are tens of thousands of these coal pits. Viking Age, and how many do you need for one iron production site? So if you have like 2,700 coal pits in an area, you probably have several hundred iron production sites. So then you start seeing the scale of this, and then you start understanding the logistics behind it. It's just so extensive that you kind of start to see to get a glimpse of the highly organized production that's been going on.
Iron is just one of the things the Viking Age traders harvested from the interior. But Ragnar and the team want to be able to track these and other commodities from here down to the market settlements on the coast. Iron is hard to trace. One commodity that has proved a better tracker for this kind of research is again found in the high uplands. And the LiDAR shows it off spectacularly. "40 kilometers southwest of Skinnebo, Eidsborg was another important source of natural raw materials during the Viking Age, and likely before. The mountains here are made from metamorphic rock, more than 270 million years old. It's a hard type of quartz mica schist, and its strata mean that it fractures in oblong lengths, from a few centimeters to 1 or 2 meters. That makes it ideal for a particular kind of everyday item that was required across the whole of Viking Scandinavia and beyond. Hone stones, or whetstones, were needed by anybody who had metal items that needed sharpening. For the Viking Age, it's easy to think that this just meant warriors' axes, swords, spears and arrowheads. Not everyone was a warrior though, yet almost everyone still needed to sharpen something. Knives, wood axes, spades, chisels, but also needles, fish hooks. It's hard to think of a more ubiquitous, everyday item. And yet the great thing for Ragnar and the team is that they turn up in the archaeology on Viking sites everywhere.
In this area, a hone stone is worthless. You can get millions of them just in the nearby region. So instead of just having rocks that you sail with, you can sail with sellable ballast. Once you get to Denmark, hone stones aren't laying around in the landscape. So then you can have a higher price on them. Once you get to England, you probably don't have the same amount of hone stones, so you then get a product that's easily sellable, and you're actually having to sail with the weight anyway. You can see the Eidsborg hone stones in massive impact on the markets in Denmark, Germany, or around the North Sea area.
Hone stones may not be treasure, but Kat Jarman has worked as an archaeologist for 20 years, and for her, everyday items like these can be some of the most rewarding finds to make.
One of the most magical things about being an archaeologist is that you get to be the person who sort of scrapes the ground and you find something, pick it up, and you realise that you're the first person to touch that for 1,000 years. The last person to have lost it lived in the Viking Age. So it's like it's a direct link between you and that person. It's something you never quite get used to, and it's the closest you get to time travel, I suppose.
While we were setting up to film, Kat happened on an example of a hone stone she excavated from a site in England.
So this is a box of objects from one of the sites I've worked on, Repton in Derbyshire, and just looking through it, I just came across another one of these hone stones. But they pop up everywhere in the archaeological record, especially from the Viking Age. This one doesn't seem to have come from a grave, so it's probably just a casual loss, something that somebody dropped and never picked up again. Okay, so you can see lovely stone. It's got a hole for hanging, just about make up some nice lines where somebody has sharpened a needle or a knife or something. And so they're just so extremely common, and yeah, it's a really nice example actually.
The quarries are protected and looked after today by the West Telemark Museum at Eidsborg. It's an important piece of Norway's heritage. The museum also preserves historic buildings from around the region. And some of these are the oldest wooden houses anywhere. They also promote traditional rural industries, preserving the skills and tools of the kind used here for centuries. And of course, they use the hone stones in exactly the same way now as people did back in Viking times. Steinar's family have lived and worked in the area for generations. The hone stones he uses today were used by those generations.
I got this sharpening stone from my father, and he got it from his father. I've been used for many years on daily work, mostly in the summertime, when I was mowing the grass. And small one they use for a shovel when they are digging ditches or things like that, to cut the roots on the top, so they need a sharp shovel.
That looks really good, Steinar.
Okay, thank you.
Now it's only 3 more meadows.
Okay.
Over the centuries, many thousands of people have lived out their working lives here. There are several quarries, and they were used for hundreds of years after the Viking Age. In fact, there was still one old hone stone maker, still working here alone, as late as the 1970s. Most of the stones you can see on the surface today are rejects, the bits the quarrymen discarded or chopped off. There's so much stone here that they could afford to be really choosy.
So this is then the debris, the kind of leftover from the production that we see all the way down here.
Yeah. So
And that's what
you get a good impression of how much stone they have taken out here. All this is waste.
And this is the main tip is out here.
Yes, but it's just one of many.
The scale of the quarries and the setting here in the mountains makes Eidsborg a unique and otherworldly place.
Wow. and that's where the path is. That's where we walked.
Yeah, you see it down there.
Most of the faces that can be seen now were worked in relatively modern times. Dag Rogmoen, curator of Eidsborg's museum, is trying to find out which parts of the quarry are the oldest, the ones the Vikings worked. Analysis of the rock's surface luminescence can reveal when it was first quarried. In other words, when it was first exposed to daylight.
So by taking samples like this, we can actually date the quarries. It could have been back in the Viking Ages that they tested out this point here. And they found out that, no, the stone isn't good enough, we try another place. And then we send this to the lab and see what they can get out of it.
One day, they might be able to reveal the actual Viking workings.
This is like something out of a science fiction movie, but thinking about the kind of reputation for looting churches and plundering and all that stuff. This industry in a small place in Vestfold and Telemark goes into a total network of trade.
Archaeologists in Bergen, Norway, working with the Vestfold and Telemark team, have matched the stone's geological signature with home stones found elsewhere in Norway, Denmark and other parts of Scandinavia, along with Britain, France and parts of Europe. The stones are the ideal trackers to help show how far and to what regions and in what quantities the Vikings traded. But that's after they've been quarried, processed and then got to the seaports. And this was something else that bothered Ragnar and the team. One thing they're pretty sure Norway in the Viking Age didn't have was roads. Not many of them at least. And certainly nothing like Roman roads in Europe. It's more than 100 kilometres from Hardangervidda down to the Vestfold coast. So how did they move all these raw materials and trade goods? With Vikings, we think of long ships, the sea-going, raiding dragons, as they were known with a shudder by their victims.
We tend to think of the Vikings as the sort of great maritime people just going across the seas from the coast to coast to do whatever it is that they needed to do. But of course, a lot of things and people and objects especially have to actually go from really quite far inland. And that's really quite a challenging logistical task. If you look at a map of Norway, for example, you have a really challenging geography. You've got some really extreme mountain environments. So going over land is quite tricky. But the one method of travel that you have at your disposal is to go along the rivers. And these rivers really can take you right to the interior and down to the coast. So people would have used the rivers. In fact, many of them may just live inland and not really go to the coast at all, but they would have had access to rivers, they would have access to those ways of transporting things and to going on boats down the rivers and to the coast. So that really was a crucial part of how anybody or anything would move in the Viking Age.
Boat traffic would have been the main way to get any heavy or bulky goods around. But there were still problems. In high mountain areas, goods had to be switched to dog or horse transport, where the rivers were too rough or inaccessible. Along the Vestfold coast are many rocky coves and bays, viks, from where we get the name Viking, Viking. Yet there aren't many ways to navigate laterally between the big rivers up into the interior. Bora is at one end of a peninsula, Kaupang and Gokstad Heimdal at the other end. Did they sail all the way around this to get to and from the trader settlements? It turned out the landscape was ready to reveal another of its secrets. Hovland, in southern Vestfold and Telemark. Petra, Krista and Erich now from the Kuterov team are getting ready to bring to a close an important fieldwork project. It's part of the Kuterov team's ongoing mission to build a geophysical and georadar picture of the county's historic sites. But they're not surveying today. Georadar can be affected by different conditions, especially how wet or dry the ground is. In different seasons or weather, the same site might reveal something that would remain hidden another day. So all across the area, the team have placed remote sensors. They can detect extremely fine variations in ground moisture, and they've been working here remotely via the GSM network for well over a year. The data will hopefully give an extra level to the overall picture they're building to shed light on the Viking Age. Down from the sensor meadow, the terrain bends and opens into a broad valley with just a small stream, and the crops always grow well on its slopes. In the 1970s, a farmer ploughing turned up large sections of an old wooden boat. People speculated it might be Viking, maybe a burial, but there were no bones nor treasure. And in any case, why would it be in the middle of a field? So the remains were thrown away. Petra and the others now dig out the censer.
Last one.
Yeah, cool. How does that feel?
Happy, tiny bit sad, but mostly happy.
Variations in ground conditions over the course of about a year are one thing. But what about much longer term changes? Maybe even across centuries? Through climate research in recent decades, it's been shown that the sea level in Norway has changed a lot since Viking times. It's thought by more than 3 meters. It's one thing to know that, but what exactly did this look like in the landscape, especially the coastline? It's another layer to the puzzle for Ragnar and the team thinking all this through.
We knew that the Viking Age shoreline was about 3.8 meters higher than it is today. So everybody knew that was a possibility for you could be sailing an inner channel.
An inner channel. But at this stage it was still a kind of theoretical myth, like the search for the Northwest Passage at sea in the 1800s. Once again, LiDAR changed everything. The team used the LiDAR data to create highly detailed present-day shoreline maps. Then the LiDAR portal gave them the ability to manipulate changes in the sea level very accurately. Low-lying areas of the modern coast gave way to water, and the lay of the Viking Age shoreline of Vestfold was restored. No one had seen it like this for more than 1,000 years. The detail was so clear that valleys and contours became broad floodplains and bays. Small streams became navigable rivers. And amazingly, in the Vestfold Peninsula, it revealed numerous long-lost waterways. One was the long-suspected inner channel that would have helped link the trader bases all the way south of Bora to Kaupang and so north via main rivers right into the uplands.
And of course, having this inner channel there ties up for a kind of a main highway between Kaupang and the smaller but still urban site at Heimdal Gokstad. And these are just situated less than 30 kilometers away from each other. And the inner channel is bang in the middle.
Ragnar and the team were making progress. It was all starting to make sense, beginning to throw light on the mysteries of Bora and Vestfold and Telemark's Viking past. In part 2, we'll see how the sea level change helped reveal the truth about Hovland and the name by which it was known in Viking times.
They kept the island name. It's still called Thor's Island.
And we'll see the amazing discoveries the team were able to bring to light.
I was like bursting out with excitement, but I had to be still because I was on the plane. And the guy next to me was actually looking at me while I was like...
I saw clearly this was a Thor's hammer.
We'll journey to the islands of Ireland and Gotland to unearth one of the most disturbing aspects of Viking history.
It is just very hard to think back to a world where slavery was just an accepted part of society. It was normal.
And in the high upland country of Telemark, we'll be there as Ragnar and the team pit themselves and their theories against the Norwegian river wild.